My wife and I have been married for 6 years. We met at work and instantly connected. As employees, we were discouraged from dating others in the office. So, I spent all of my time trying to make her laugh and joking with her about the other people around us. Eventually, I found a new job at a great place, and on my last day in the office, I asked her out. She said yes, and we fell in love. We got married after about a year and a half of being together, and it was one of the best decisions of our lives. The pandemic happened early on in our marriage, and at first it was causing some stress. We had been used to being away from each other during the workdays and only really seeing each other on weekends and evenings. It isn't that we didn't love each other, but we both had our own time for ourselves. The pandemic really got both of us thinking about our health. We were both relatively healthy. We ate well for the most part, and before the pandemic, we got most of our exercise from running around our respective offices. However, with the pandemic, we were very sedentary and both of us were putting on a little bit of weight. When things started to clear up, we both decided that we wanted to get a gym membership. We went together, and we had a good time focusing on this new lifestyle. On top of that, we both really loved exercising, and we could see the benefits of it fairly quickly. We started going to the gym together 3 or 4 times a week. The more we went, the more confident we were. Our membership was at a local place, owned by someone we knew, so we recognized a lot of the people at the gym. There was a sense of community there that we liked. One day, while we were driving back from the gym, my wife asked me who my gym crush was. I was taken aback by the question because it seemed like a weird thing for her to ask. She assured me that she wasn't going to take it the wrong way, but she'd seen me paying attention to some of the other girls in the gym, and she was just curious. In fact, she promised to tell me hers. I thought about it for a moment, and I realized that I was confident enough in our relationship to have that conversation with her. Of course, neither of us was the only person we were attracted to. We are both human after all. As long as neither of us acted on those impulses, we were fine. I told her who mine was. We'll call her Heather. Heather went to the gym with her fiancé, and we crossed paths with both of them often. My wife confessed that her crush was Heather's fiancé. We'll call him Joe. We teased each other about it after we confessed, but it was never really something that came up again. Several months later, I was playing basketball with some friends from the neighborhood, and I landed very badly and tore a ligament in my knee. I had to go through some physical therapy alongside months of rest. During those months, I wasn't able to go to the gym with my wife. She was still going, which I had no issues with whatsoever. She had been very passionate about her fitness and activity after the fact, so I was happy she was still doing it. I just wished that I could have gone with her. After the injury, I found myself in a depressive episode. I was trapped in my house for the majority of my time, and I was feeling isolated and alone, so I took up some bad habits. I put on a little bit of weight, and some of the muscle tone that I had earned over the months of going to the gym disappeared. It didn't help my depression that I could see it happening and felt helpless to stop it. I complained about the issues I was having with my body to my wife often, and she did what she could to assure me that it wasn't an issue, and she would love me no matter what. However, her actions spoke differently. It seemed like she didn't want around me as much. She had been laid off during the pandemic and still wasn't working, but she was out all the time running errands. On top of that, we weren't having sex. I took it as her not being attracted to me, but I didn't want to go to her and ask about that. I think a big part of me was too afraid to hear the truth. She started going to the gym more and more, and I started to realize that she was going 5 or 6 times a week, which was more than we had really gone. It definitely seemed like she just wanted to get away from me. Months passed, and I was done with my rest and going to physical therapy to try and get everything back to normal. When I was finally cleared to be off crutches and able to begin light exercise again, I jumped at the opportunity. My wife gladly brought me back to the gym, and everybody else there seemed happy that I was back. I was friendly with just about everybody at the gym. That included Heather and Joe. My first week back, everybody, including Heather, came over to me and asked me all about my recovery and how I was feeling. I didn't notice it at the time, but Joe was steering clear of me. Looking back after I returned to the gym, he and I hadn't had a single conversation with each other. I couldn't remember him talking to my wife either. Because I was still recovering, I wasn't able to go to the gym very often. I had to take it easy and make sure I was giving myself time to recuperate. I was going to the gym every other day for the most part. My wife kept going at her normal pace. I was working from home, so thankfully I was able to step out and take walks or things like that whenever I wanted to, as long as I was getting my work done. My wife told me one morning that she was going to the gym in the afternoon. It was one of my resting days, so I hadn't planned on going with her. Around lunchtime, I was feeling fidgety, like I had a lot of energy that I needed to get rid of. I figured I could take an hour and go cycle or walk on the treadmill, so I made my way over. My wife told me she was going to be there, so I was expected to see her inside when I arrived. I looked around for her, and she was nowhere to be seen. I asked a woman at the front desk if she saw my wife, but she told me that she didn't think she'd come in yet that day. I was worried right away. I trusted my wife, and when she told me she was going to the gym, I believed her. If she wasn't there and she wasn't at home, she was somewhere between her house and the gym, and somehow she didn't make it there. My mind wandered to the worst case scenarios, so I rushed back to my car and slowly made the drive home to see if I could spot anything. I didn't see her car in a ditch or anything like that, which eased my mind. I called her when I got back to see where she was, but she didn't answer. I felt completely helpless. In my mind, my wife was being held captive in someone's basement, and there was nothing I could do about it. I waited for about an hour, and then she walked in the front door. She was still in her workout clothes, as if she had gone to the gym when I knew that she hadn't. I asked her where she was, and she told me she was at the gym. Obviously, I knew that she was lying. I just didn't know why. I explained the situation to her and told her that I didn't see her at the gym, and I was worried. She played it off like she didn't understand why the worker said I wasn't there, suggesting that there might have been a shift change while she was there. She told me that she was in the sauna for a while, which might explain why I didn't see her there. The excuses she gave made sense, but something was telling me not to believe them. I saw with my own eyes that she wasn't there. I was scoring around for her car, and I didn't see it anywhere in the lot at the gym. My wife was lying to me, and my paranoia started taking full control of my brain. Later that night while she was asleep, I took it upon myself to find out the truth of what was really happening. I grabbed her phone and looked through it for any clues about where she was. I found that within seconds of opening her phone, she was with Joe. Their messages were all pretty tame. There were a few messages where they would tell each other they missed each other, but for the most part, it was them planning times to get together. They were hooking up a few times a week. Apparently, Joe worked from home while Heather didn't, so whenever she would leave, my wife would head over to their house. I was completely heartbroken by what I saw, especially when I put the pieces together that their affair started while I was home recovering from my injury and feeling very bad about myself. It seemed like everything I thought about my relationship with my wife was wrong, and it was devastating to learn that. I knew that I needed to divorce her, but while I looked over the text messages, I didn't think it was sufficient evidence to prove that there was an affair. It seemed like there could be something going on, but there wasn't anything in there that explicitly mentioned they were having sex. I needed to see it for myself and get some kind of proof. I did a quick search online for some kind of app or something I could download on my wife's phone to be able to track her. It sounds awful, but I needed to know when she was actually going to the gym and when she was going to Joe's house. My intention was just to follow her there and make sure I could get the proof I needed. I found one and got it set up so next time she told me she was going to the gym, I could be ready. After 2 days, my wife told me that she was going to the gym. I waited for about half an hour after she left and checked the app. She was not at the gym. I quickly finished up what I was doing with my work and I made my way over to the address she was at. I walked to the front door and looked at a piece of mail to see that it was Joe's house. My wife's car was in the driveway, so I knew that I was going to be possibly witnessing one of the worst things I could imagine. I realized that I couldn't get into the house, so that posed a bit of a problem for me. I needed to see what was happening, so I did something a little bit illegal. I opened an electric bill belonging to Heather, and I got her phone number from that. I called her and explained everything. She was skeptical at first, but she agreed to head right over to see for herself if I was right about everything. I hid the electric bill in my car, so they would never know that I had to open it to contact her, and I waited for her to arrive. As soon as I saw her, I walked to the door with her. When she opened the front door, the chain lock was up. That immediately made her suspicious. That was never up, so she thought it was him trying to keep her out of the house. We snuck around to the back door, and she let us both in through there. When we got in, we could hear music playing from the bedroom, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. All of the signs pointed to my wife having an affair, but there was still part of me that had the slightest bit of hope that I was misreading things. Of course, that wasn't the case. Heather led me to the bedroom where she opened the door to see my wife and Joe together. They were both surprised to see us there. Heather ran up to Joe and started hitting him on the head with her purse. I couldn't blame her for reacting that way. My wife covered herself as quickly as she could and tried to explain herself to me. She told me that it just happened while they were at the gym. She tried to tell me it was the first time anything like that had happened, and she regretted it. I told her that I knew she was lying and there wasn't any point in to expect to get divorced. She still hadn't found a job since being laid off from hers during the pandemic. She had gotten quite comfortable with not working, which had been a point of contention in our relationship in the past, but I made enough for us to still live comfortably. She tried to convince me to change my mind about it right there while we were standing in the doorway of the room she was just cheating on me in. I told her that my mind was made up and I was going through with it. She was angry about that, and as I was walking away, she told me that she wasn't attracted to me anyway and that I couldn't ever really satisfy her. I knew the second part was a lie, but the first part of what she said stunned. I had my insecurities about how I looked after the injury, and hearing somebody who was supposed to love you say it wasn't a blast. Heather and I both ended up divorcing our partners, and we wrote letters to each other's divorce attorneys explaining everything that happened since we didn't have any photographic evidence. I kicked my wife out of my house, and she ended up moving in with Joe. They were apparently in love with each other and planned on spending the rest of their lives together. They both got married a few months after the divorces were finalized, which I know now that they regret because they're in the process of divorcing. Heather and I talk to each other on occasion, and we laugh about how dumb of a decision it was for them to remarry so quickly. From everything I gathered, Joe ended up cheating on my ex-wife with another woman from the gym. That's what sparked their divorce. I'm happy knowing that my ex-wife was forced to get a job and spend a good portion of her earnings paying for two separate divorce attorneys. Oh, V, your injury sounds like it was a lot for you to handle, and it seems like your wife wasn't there for you throughout it. You were vulnerable in telling us about your insecurities with your body after everything, and it seems like you expressed that to your wife too. For her to know that and make you feel the way that you did is awful, especially telling you at the end of the relationship that she cheated on you because of that. I think her true colors were clear when she adamantly lied about being at the gym when you knew that she wasn't. You caught her in the lie, and yet she still held to it. Obviously, I doubt she would confess to what she did at the time, but the fact that she kept up a lie like that says a lot about her. It's good that both you and Heather divorced your partners, and I think it is kind of funny that they both got married and divorced so quickly. Joe cheating on your wife is karma for her. I can only hope that Joe gets something back at him sometime soon, and I agree your wife had to pay a lot of money for two separate divorce attorneys in a very short amount of time, and that is pretty awful for her. I hope you are taking time to take care of yourself again and feel comfortable in your skin. I know going through something like this with your partner is pretty disheartening, but I do wish that you will find someone in the future who will value you and respect you in a relationship. Now, let's move on to our next story. My girlfriend and I met when we were both fresh out of high school and working in the same grocery store over the summer. We were both going to college out of state, but we lived just one town over from each other. We got to talking while we worked there, and we hit it off. I was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to dating, so I didn't realize that she had feelings for me when she did. She ended up asking me out because I was clueless about her feelings toward me. Of course I said yes. I thought she was amazing, and I jumped at the first opportunity one had to go out with her. We continued dating through the rest of our college years, occasionally going to visit the other person on weekends or breaks when we had the chance. But we looked forward to those summer breaks when we could spend 3 months with each other virtually uninterrupted. She was my first love, and I was completely convinced at the time that she and I were going to be together forever. I know now that was just childish naivety, but I was hopeful. The main reason she went to the university that she did was because they had an incredible study abroad program. I knew that in the summer between her junior year and senior year, she was planning on going to London. I knew that from the moment I met her because she was very excited about it. That summer, I got to see her for about a week before she flew out to attend her summer program. We still talked often because I wanted to hear all about her travels, so we FaceTimed and texted each other whenever we had the chance. I was happy for her, but I missed her like crazy. I was complaining about it to my parents, and they could see how upsetting it was for me, so they offered to pay for a plane ticket to go see her. My girlfriend was excited about it when I told her, and we planned the perfect time to get together, so she could show me some of her favorite spots in the city and we could spend time together. She told me about a lot of the friends that she made while she was in her program. Of course, I didn't know every single one of her friends, but from what I gathered, it didn't seem like anything was going on. A couple of weeks before I was set to take my trip, she was pretty much MIA in terms of phone calls or responding to my messages. She would check in now and then just to tell me that she was fine, but she wasn't giving me anything else. I had a bad feeling about it, initially thinking that maybe something was going on and she was trying to ghost me, but that didn't seem like something she would do, so I wasn't sure. When it got closer to my date of departure, she was communicating with me a lot more. She told me that she had been stressed out with class stuff and was sort of in a bad place because of it. I felt bad for assuming anything else was going on. I flew to London, and she met me at the airport to take me back to the flat she was staying in. She introduced me to a lot of her friends. The only person that she introduced me to that I didn't know about beforehand was a guy that we'll call Dan. I hated being this way, but seeing the guy that I knew was probably hanging out with my girlfriend without me automatically raised some red flags. My girlfriend was beautiful, and in my eyes, anybody would have been foolish not to want to be with her. However, I quickly picked up on the fact that he was dating another one of my girlfriend's friends, who we will call Katie. The two of us went sightseeing the first day that I was there. She showed me some incredible places, and we went to some lovely cafes and bookstores. The second day that I was there, we went on a double date with Dan and Katie. There was this fun arcade that we went to, and afterward we went for a walk in a park. Katie and I actually had a lot in common when it came to the video games at the arcade. It was a place that she suggested we all go to because she loved it, and my girlfriend and Dan weren't really into things like that. So it might have been a little bit of my fault in this, but I spent the majority of that time talking to her about the games. Dan and my girlfriend were sitting at the table together, and I happened to look over at them at one point to see them smiling and laughing at each other with Dan reaching for her hand. It immediately brought back all the suspicions that I had. When everything was over, I asked my girlfriend about it. She told me that it was nothing and he was just making a joke, and he was a touchy person. That didn't make me feel any better. We ended up getting into an argument about it because I felt like she was lying to me. It was difficult because we only had a couple more days together in London before I had to go back to the States and get ready for my senior year. After that, we wouldn't see each other until the winter break. I could tell that she was still upset with me in the morning, but we apologized and decided that we wanted to make the best of the time we would have together. I didn't see Dan or Katie again for the rest of the time I was in London. I got back home and I was bummed with how everything went while I was with her. I went back to school for the first semester of my senior year, and things seemed to be normal between us. We were communicating over the phone like we always did during the semester. I saw her again over the winter break, and things were different between us. She was cold and less open to me than she normally was. By that time, I wasn't thinking about the argument we had, and I genuinely didn't understand why she was acting the way that she was. Whenever we would talk, it would always be about things not related to us. Specifically, she would always tell me about things that were going on in the group chat she had with the people that she met in London. I know she adored all of them, and she considered them to be very close friends. She was contemplating moving to London after graduation and getting an apartment with them. I spent New Year's Eve with her, and I noticed that she didn't want to be around me much. We were at a party at a bar in her hometown, and around midnight I went to find her to kiss her when the ball dropped. Just as I was about to kiss her, she turned her face away from me, so I kissed her cheek. I was surprised, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. When we got back to her house after everything I asked her about it, my gut was telling me that she did it because she didn't want to commit to me for a year and it was some superstition that she had. She made it seem like I was looking into it too much. I slept over at her house that night, but I couldn't get the idea of it out of my mind. We had been drifting apart for some time and I didn't want to lose her, but it felt like I was. It was about 3 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. I was just lying in bed next to her and I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand showing Dan's name. From my understood, they didn't talk to each other much aside from group settings. Seeing him reach out to her was confusing. I quietly grabbed her phone and read the message. He wished her a happy New Year's and said that he was sorry for not being her midnight kiss. That prompted me to look through their other messages where I saw that they had been exchanging pictures and videos of each other for months. From some of the context, I clearly understood that they had been sleeping together while she was in London. I knew that I was right to be suspicious about what was happening with Dan. My gut told me something was going on with them, and my girlfriend lied to me when I asked her about it. I didn't see any way that I could continue being with her after what happened, and it didn't seem like she wanted to make it work either. I sent myself screenshots of their messages, so I would have them, and I left. I didn't tell her about what I was doing, and I didn't give her any heads up that I knew about her and Dan. I just left and didn't tell her anything. She was going to be wondering what happened for a little while. I didn't talk to her for the rest of the break, even though she messaged me a few times wanting to get together before we left for our final semesters. I went back to school and continued ignoring her. I could tell from her messages that she was hurt by my completely ghosting her, which I was thankful for. She hurt me and I wanted her to be hurt back, but I also wanted to do something else. I didn't feel like it was enough to get back at her for how she hurt me. I stood on it for a while and eventually decided to reach out to her friends from London and let them know what my girlfriend had been doing with Dan. I threw all of them in a group chat and I explained everything, sending screenshots of the evidence to them. I didn't respond much in the chat, but it blew up with all of them expressing how shocked they were and telling me how sorry they were for me. On top of that, they kept mentioning how there were signs all along, but they didn't want to believe it. Dan's girlfriend Katie was in that chat, and she was talking about how she was going to make him regret what he did. Surprisingly, they didn't kick me out of the group chat. I was in it, and they kept checking in with me to see how I was doing. They seemed like a solid group of people. From what they told me, they all stopped talking to my girlfriend because they couldn't stand her for what she did. My girlfriend reached out to me after she found out what happened and told me that I had no business going through her phone. Her main point was that I invaded her privacy and ruined her plans for after graduation. She couldn't afford to live in London on her own, so she had no way of making that dream come true. Katie got her revenge on Dan by sleeping with his brother. Normally, I wouldn't condone behavior like that, but it was pretty funny. Not only did she break up with Dan, but she potentially ruined his relationship with his sibling. I guess that was one way to get revenge. Now I have graduated, and that was a couple of years in the past. I'm not close friends with any of those girls from that group chat, but we're still friendly. I do know that if I ever end up in London again, I can hang out with a couple of them, and we can have a nice little reunion. Oh, V. I'm so sorry I had to go through all of that. It seems like your girlfriend might have been feeling guilty when she wasn't talking to you for that week before you arrived. I could understand if she was feeling panicked about the possibility of you coming into contact with Dan. Their demeanor in the bar definitely clued me into the affair they were having. They must have just forgotten that they were there with their partners and were acting like it was a date. I always think it's interesting when people take their partners on double dates with their affair partners. There must be some level of false confidence involved that makes them think that they can get through that without any signals. It's good that you cut her off completely. It's better to do that than try to give her a chance to sway your mind to stay with her. I'll never understand why somebody who is unhappy in a relationship will stay in it and cheat rather than do the right thing and end the relationship before moving on. Breakups are tough, but they're worlds better than being cheated on. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact One Quality I, 40, admired in my wife, 44, was her enthusiasm for holidays. She said whenever she gathered with others to celebrate, it felt warm, fuzzy, and magical. Easter was no exception. She loved dyeing eggs and taking the kids on Easter egg hunts. Even though our twins grew to be too old for Easter egg hunts, she maintained her holiday routine. In preparation for Easter, she collected and boiled our chickens' eggs, dyed them, usually with the help of our sons, and used them in the egg hunt for the younger kids at the church. Besides basically hosting the church event, she also planted a large combination of daffodils, crocus, and hyacinth seedlings. She had at least 200 flowers ready for sale 9 days before Easter. She transported them with her econoline from the grow tent in the backyard to her selling spot on the corner by the supermarket. I helped her with this project every year, including last year's Easter holiday, when unbeknownst to me she met AP. There were no clues that she was communicating with another romantic partner. She would just so casually tell me she was talking to her mother. I did not get along with my MIL. She drove me crazy, but I tolerated her for my wife and children's sake. By this Easter, our twins were 15 years old, so they didn't exactly jump up to go to Grandma's house. Thank goodness. I had a reason to stay home now. How could I have known I couldn't trust my wife when she told me she was talking to her mother or going to see her mother? On this Easter Sunday, my wife already had the eggs hidden for the children to find in the grass and trees behind the church. The teenagers wanted to stay home, and since my wife told me her mother was going to be at the church, probably close to my wife, I elected to stay home. About 30 minutes after my wife left, her mom called the house phone. I was a little concerned, so I answered it. It became clear that she never intended to join the Easter egg hunt this year. She was calling to see if my wife could come over after church to clip her toenails. I shuddered and hung up. Since I distinctly remembered her telling me her mother would be there, my hunch told me something was up. I let my teenagers stay home and went to the egg hunt. I spotted my wife standing alone, watching the children hunt for eggs. I walked over to her, and as soon as I greeted her, I saw panic in her eyes. She kept glancing at the church building, like she expected someone to come out any minute. She quickly asked me why I was there, but before I answered, she told me her mother would be back out from the restroom any minute, so I should go back home. I calmly and grudgingly told her that I already knew her mom wasn't here. Her face and neck turned red, and she started itching until she saw a man come out of the church and start heading towards us. She quickly told me the man headed our way was just a friend that wanted to date her, but she already told him she was married. I was confused and hardly had time to think before he asked me if I was the reason she ghosted him the past week. I said excuse me, and then told him she was my wife, and we were married for the past 19 years. He was immediately deflated and told me they'd been seeing each other for a year. I was taken aback. It felt like the wind was knocked out of me. She told me that wasn't true, and that he'd been harassing her to the point where she considered calling the police. I just looked at her like she was crazy and asked how that could have been happening without me knowing. AP called her a liar and demanded she tell me about their plans for the future. When she covered her face, he grabbed her wrist to move her hand, and without thinking, I pushed him in an attempt to stop him from touching her. This resulted in us fighting. I remember getting a few punches in before I blacked out. When I came to, the police were there and many of the egg hunting children were gone, left in a hurry with their families because of the brawl. I was seen in an ambulance, and it was concluded I had a concussion. The police told me what I already found out. My wife was cheating on me. The word got around fast from people that went to our church, and she was pretty much shunned by all of them. As far as I know, she was practically banned from ever stepping foot in that church again. I couldn't imagine my wife willingly seeing a man, even planning a future with him, all behind my back. It felt like a nightmare. It came to light that he had a child from a previous marriage who was present at the egg hunt that my wife invited them to. AP told me that he was ending things with her, as well since he had no idea she was married. He mentioned that she begged him not to leave her and said that she told him I was abusive, which was completely made up. It was disturbing to me how my wife could sabotage our entire family all by one idiotic decision. This was enough to end everything we had together as a family, and it broke my heart. The kids and I didn't deserve this. I read posts about this in the past, But since I never did anything to betray my wife's trust, discourage her, or disappoint her, I never thought she would have a reason to cheat on me. I was just dumb for failing to realize this would happen to me. Opie, I am so sorry you and your sons had to go through this. I want you to know it was absolutely no fault of yours. She lied about you being abusive to make it look like she was only doing what any other battered woman would do. Leave the bad man and find a new love. The only problem is she didn't leave you, and you didn't deserve to be left. She just found a new love, lied, and pretended everything was fine to your face. She tried to justify leaving her family after 19 years by portraying you as a bad spouse. You must realize that this happens to men who least expect it every day, so you aren't dumb for failing to realize her deception. Just stay strong for your sons, and remember that you can make the best of this life change. Stay hopeful and remain honest in your relationships. There are honest and good women out there who are looking for a respectable man. Get out there, be honest, and find as many things as you can to be passionate about. I wish you the best of luck in life. Now, let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I were chefs in a gourmet kitchen in New York City. We knew each other for 14 years and were married for 9. We enjoyed every day together, working nearly identical shifts at the restaurant. Ratatouille was our favorite movie because our hats were identical. A year after the movie, I actually adopted 2 pet rats as a joke for my wife. She loved them. She told me months later she didn't know she could get so attached to rodents. Anyway, our relationship was great and full of imagination and happy times. After our passed away, we decided to conceive. When we struggled to do so, we took it as a sign to adopt. Our daughter's first birthday with us was her 8th. She had some emotional challenges that we worked through together, through honesty and patience. It felt like our family was strong and united. So, when I got a phone call from the police 2 years later, I was extremely confused. I was at the grocery store with my daughter, and as far as I knew, my wife was working a shift at restaurant. The police informed me that she was at the police station, unharmed, but they wanted to ask me some questions. I was a little unsettled, and my mind raced until I got there. With our daughter under my sister's watch, the police started asking me questions like, when did you find out what your wife was doing? And how long did you plot revenge against him? All I would ask, repeatedly, what is going on? Where was my wife? What happened? I had no idea what they were talking about, and after about an hour and a half of interrogation, they believed me. They verified that I was at the grocery store at the time of the attack on AP in his own home, while my wife was there having sex with him. He was stabbed by an intruder while he was in bed with her. The culprit was covered from head to toe and fled the scene. My wife was the one that called 911. I was terrified. I started crying uncontrollably. My wife cheated on me and experienced this traumatic event. Then I felt relieved that I was recorded at a different place during the attack, being the dedicated father I was determined to be. As I shopped for groceries, my wife was cheating on me. I felt so stupid, even though there was no way I could have known. Then the police told me this guy was in critical condition, and he was having an affair with more than 4 other women. My wife just happened to be there when someone else wanted revenge. They let me go, and I saw my wife waiting for me. She looked disturbed and restless. When she saw me, there was brief relief, followed by great sadness when she remembered she cheated on me. I walked right by her, refusing to speak. She followed me, crying and begging to talk about this. I told her we were over, and that I planned to start seeing other people immediately. I sarcastically told her she made an excellent choice for an affair partner because he was very experienced. She admitted she was extremely stupid for sleeping with this guy after they talked for about 2 months on a dating app, but that was all he would ever amount to in her life. She pretty much demanded that I forgive her because she was worth it, and we already spent so many happy years together. I told her she ruined everything just before I slammed my car door and drove home. I called my parents and sister came over to help me through this time and try to make our home environment happy for my daughter. Within 24 hours, I filed for divorce. She tried to come home that same day and got into a fight with my parents when they refused to let her in. After some screaming, They actually managed to convince her to leave with just a few suitcases of her belongings. When our daughter saw her again, she told her she was very disappointed in her. Can you imagine that? Hearing that your 10-year-old adopted daughter is disappointed in you. After all we went through to adopt her and work through her emotional trauma, my wife let her down and made her a little less hopeful. That was enough punishment in itself, but my wife was obviously divorced by me, so she lost her home, and then she was also fired from the restaurant. I told our boss that we worked for the past 12 years, what happened, and how our relationship ended in the worst way possible. She lied to me that day. She didn't have a shift to work. They decided this made her untrustworthy and fired her for it. She was so deflated and disappointed in her life's new path that she didn't fight for her job, she just accepted it. She's still living at her parents', without a job or plans for the future. My daughter and I have been quite the opposite, just hopeful and keeping ourselves busy. Besides work and school, we go hiking, camping, sailing, and travel to fun destinations. Opie, I don't understand how your wife didn't think of her husband or daughter before doing this and stop dead in her tracks. I'm surprised every time I hear one of these stories that the spouse failed to have a moment of clarity where they decide not to destroy everything they built with a person they claim to love. It's hard to believe these cheaters even have normal emotions or might have understand what a relationship entails. They blow it, and once the trust and loyalty is gone, it's nearly impossible to recover. Things are never as they were before it happened, and it's always better to end the relationship. The emotional torment of staying together doesn't compare to the temporary adjustment of separation. At least in separation, there's newfound hope in the future, instead of worry and paranoia. I believe that you made all the right decisions, given your circumstances, and wish nothing but the best for you and your daughter. You're an inspiration to us all. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife, 23, and I, 26, were struggling to pay the bills for a while by the time I asked her to get a job. We had a newborn baby, so she'd been trying to work from home by starting her own business, but it was costing us more money than it was earning. It was really disappointing, and neither of us were feeling very hopeful at this time in our life. She agreed to get a part-time job and told me she started applying to anything around the area. Not even 3 days went by before she told me she was hired at a gas station down the street and she'd be working at night, so we didn't have to pay anyone to watch our newborn. It seemed like it was going to work out great. 2 weeks went by without a paycheck from her job, and I was missing my wife in bed. It was a hard adjustment, although my wife seemed really happy. She said she enjoyed her job, and it felt good to be making money for us. At least she was happy, I thought. Another week went by, and she still didn't have a paycheck. When I asked her what was taking so long, she said she accidentally put in the wrong account number on her direct deposit form. It was frustrating, but things happen, I thought. She continued working for another 2 weeks without a paycheck. I'd finally had enough. What would delay her paycheck for so long? Then I got the unsettling thought that maybe my wife wasn't going to work at all. She was very happy, didn't seem at all concerned about the money she was missing, and she would only ever tell me not to worry about it. So one night, I decided to have my friend follow her to work. I had to stay with the baby, and she wouldn't be looking for my friend's car. He called me after 35 minutes with really bad news. My wife had driven way past the gas station into some random house. She went inside, and he hasn't heard or seen anything since. My heart nearly stopped when I heard this. I told him to come get me. We took the baby to my mom's house on the way to this random house my wife was visiting. I tried to open the front door, even though my friend thought I was crazy. It was locked anyway. So I sat in the car with my friend watching the house and wondering what to do. Finally, 1 hour before her shift would end, the porch light came on, and she came out of the house with a man. He kissed her passionately on the lips before she left. Sweat started pouring out of me, and I felt like I was falling. My friend drove at a distance from her until she got to a diner. She spent my money to pay for her breakfast, so she didn't have a part-time job. She was going to this guy's house and spending the night every night. My friend didn't really know what to say, but it was good to just have someone there with me. I asked him what I should do, and he suggested I hire a PI. I couldn't afford that, but he did give me an idea. I asked him if he could sit outside the house at least one more time to get some pictures. Any pictures would help. He agreed. I also bought and installed a GPS tracker on my wife's car. It was so hard for me to resist following her or confronting her with what I found out. I waited 4 days to give my friend and the GPS tracker time to get some evidence. While I waited, I tried to figure out where I knew this man from. He looked so familiar, and it wasn't until I stopped thinking about it that his identity dawned on me. He was the pastor of a church I visited about 3 times years ago. He was married when I visited the church, but I wasn't sure if that was still the case. I sent him a friend request on Facebook, and he accepted it, probably assuming I was a churchgoer. I told my friend I knew who the guy was, and he said I would be either really pleased or really upset with the pictures he got. My friend went above and beyond to help me. He snuck up to the bedroom window of the house, using something to stand on to take pictures through the window. There was just enough light to tell that it was my wife, having sex with the pastor. He was right. I didn't know if I was pleased or upset. I was upset, but pleased I could prove she was cheating on me. It was time to turn my wife's world upside down. After she left for work one night, I took all my stuff and her son to my mom's house. I left divorce papers on the table, and right when my wife should have been arriving home, I posted the pictures my friend took and the GPS tracker information on Facebook. I tagged her, her friends and family, and the pastor himself. There was a digital explosion. All of the pastor's Facebook friends, including his wife, reacted to my post. All of my wife's friends and family commented, asking me what I was going to do, how she could do this, and offering me consolation. Some of them flat out insulted my wife, telling her she was a terrible person and didn't deserve to see her infant baby anymore. That was harsher than even I could be. My wife called me, dismayed and overwhelmed. She wasn't sure what to ask about first, but she started with asking me to take my post off Facebook. I refused. She asked me how I expected her to survive after divorce, and that was the stupidest question she could have asked. I said, "How about you get a job like you told me you were going to do, instead of sleeping with a married pastor behind my back?" She gasped, claiming she didn't know he was married. The divorce went super well for me. I won primary custody of our son, and my wife was ordered to pay me child support and alimony. She was able to keep the house because it was in her name, but she failed to make the mortgage payments. She had no choice but to move in with her parents, who lived out of state. They didn't want her to move in, but eventually said she could stay in the basement. It's good for her that her car was paid off by me at this point, because I'm sure that it would have been repoed if it wasn't. She called me often, crying. She missed our son and me. She admitted she'd been a lazy and inconsiderate wife. She swore she would never be the same person again, but it didn't matter to me anymore. The pastor's wife was on a missionary trip, while her husband had sex with my wife in their house. She filed for divorce as well, and actually thanked me for investigating and revealing what was going on. She asked me if I wanted to go out to dinner some night, and I agreed. It didn't take me long to be able to afford a new house for my son and I. My mom watches him each day, and she's never been happier. Things can work out, and time keeps moving even if you don't. I couldn't stop moving because my son depends on me. I've also started speaking positively to myself, choosing to focus on the goodness in life, rather than the negativity. Wow, Opie, what you've endured is an extremely difficult thing to go through. I'm so sorry your wife didn't consider you or your son before choosing to pretend she got a job. She made that selfish decision knowing it would only benefit her. I don't know what her plan would have been if she realized she never got a paycheck, but people who cheat don't usually think very far into the future or consider the possibilities of being caught. You absolutely made the right decision by getting a GPS tracker and asking your friend to take some pictures. I love how you remembered who this man was and actually added him as a friend on Facebook. It was an excellent decision to leave the house with your son and post the evidence just as your wife arrived home to an empty house and divorce papers. I have faith that you'll find a woman who's not only considerate of your wants and needs, but also accepts your son as her own. Now, let's get into today's second story. My wife admitted to me before our wedding that she got very drunk and slept with another man. She said she knew him a while before, off and on for years. She never saw him romantically, but that night she was so drunk she didn't even remember how she got to his house. She actually wasn't sure if she was drugged. Considering how honest and serious she was being, I went through marrying her. I was more nervous than before, but the fact that she confessed and wanted to be honest had to mean something, right? She swore to me that she would never speak to said man ever again. That was a necessary promise. She also promised she would never be unfaithful to me in marriage. We had a good marriage for 5 years. We argued sometimes, but it was about normal stuff and we both knew how to control our anger and walk away or drop it if necessary. We always came back together afterwards and appreciated the other's maturity about the disagreement. That all meant nothing when I came home early from work one day. I thought my wife was still at work, but her car was in the driveway and another was parked on the side street. I didn't think too much of it and went inside. I heard a voice upstairs and thought maybe it was the TV. I got to the upstairs hallway and heard the bed squeaking, followed by moaning and a man's voice. Then my wife's voice and more moaning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like my soul was floating above my body because I couldn't allow myself to register what was happening. It was my worst nightmare. I pushed the door open a little and saw my wife was doing my stepbrother. All the air left my lungs. I know I looked mortified, but my face couldn't have been as disturbed as theirs when they saw me watching them. They leaped up, but it was happening in slow motion to me. I remembered at this moment that I put a hidden camera in our bedroom 2 years ago. It was plunked in and set to record during the times I wasn't home. The camera would upload these videos onto my desktop through Wi-Fi. I hadn't even looked in the videos folder since I installed it because I never felt the need to. Thank God I'd forgotten about it, and thank God my wife never discovered it. Since she cheated before our wedding, I knew I needed to watch her, but my own stepbrother, I couldn't believe it. I was looking right at him, junk and all, and I couldn't believe it. We were never close, but I didn't think my wife and him ever had a chance to grow a relationship. I was wrong. Dead wrong. How many times had this happened? Was our bedroom the only place they'd had sex? My stepbrother still lived with my father and stepmom, so I'm sure they didn't go there. So it was at this point that I started screaming. I screamed for him to get out, which he did very quickly. My wife wanted to leave too, but she also wanted to apologize to me. No matter what she said, I hated it. I screamed at her, face red as a tomato I'm sure, to get out of my house. She hesitated, even though she was sobbing and gasping for air. When she didn't leave and tried saying pointless words to me, I grabbed a porcelain horse, a statue my wife cherished, and threw it across the room. It smashed into a million pieces, and she ran out of the house, holding her clothes. Thank God I didn't have any children with this woman. I think a part of me knew she was going to be unfaithful. I got on my desktop computer and found the video from Today Plus Some. She'd done this 7 times in our house, in our bed. One of those times, I had sex with her the same night. I posted their sex video on Facebook, tagging my wife and stepbrother. All of our family freaked out. They couldn't believe how uncensored the video was, and that my wife and stepbrother would stoop so low. My dad called me. He was crying. At this point, I felt kind of bad, but he only wanted to console me. He said he never wanted me to experience heartbreak, and the fact that it happened with my brother killed him. I told him it wasn't his fault, and if he wanted to help me, he needed to kick out my stepbrother. He agreed immediately. My wife tried arranging to meet with me so we could talk about things, but there was nothing to discuss. I told her she broke my heart and trust in everyone. After the affair fog wore off, my wife realized the magnitude of her actions. She didn't try to get anything from me in the divorce, and she accepted the fault and karma that followed. I kicked her out, and now she lives with a roommate. I'm happy to report that I still have a great job and a place to live. I got a dog and a dragon. When all of this first happened, I was pretty messed up emotionally and slept around with some women. I think I'm ready to get back into the dating scene, but I wanted to share my story first. I survived the worst moment in my life and recovered from the pain, blaming myself and wondering why. I realized that I am all I need, but the company of my pets and other women helped. Anyone can get through anything because as humans, we wouldn't have to endure anything we couldn't handle. Wow, Opie, you've experienced a very traumatic event. I am so sorry your wife failed to consider you in her decisions. She became selfish and egotistical. Anyone who genuinely loves their partner wouldn't hide anything from them, especially something of this magnitude. If your wife would have put your needs above her own, or even at the same level as hers, this wouldn't have happened. No one needs to be cheated on, but inconsiderate spouses only think about what they want or deserve. The ego is a dangerous thing that can easily get out of hand. You handled yourself as best you could and made the wise decision to divorce. Thank you for sharing your story, Opie. I have faith you'll be able to find a wise woman who communicates openly with you and honors you as her spouse. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I have an incredible story about a husband who uncovered his principal wife's shocking secret affair and how he sought revenge. Principal at the local school. Kids loved her. Parents respected her. As far as anyone was concerned, we were the ideal family. Two kids, both boys, both smart as whips, and a dog, old Rufus, who was more family than a pet. Perfect, right? Well, life sure knows how to play its cards. Just when you think you've got the winning hand, it throws in a wild one. This strange new chapter in my life began with subtle things. You know, those small details that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. Well, I wasn't looking, but they started sticking out like sore thumbs. It was like my wife's routine started changing all too suddenly. She'd come home late, always glued to her phone, her mind 1,000 miles away. I'm no detective, but I know something's up when I see it. Our tradition started to fade too. We had a thing. You see, dinner at the table, all four of us, no exceptions. Well, there started to be exceptions. She'd be late from work or she'd be too wrapped up in her so-called schoolwork to join us. It bugged me, but I brushed it off thinking maybe she's just got a lot on her plate. Man, was I wrong? And then one day I saw it. I wasn't snooping around, mind you, but her phone was just lying there buzzing with messages. She was out in the garden with the kids. And I thought maybe it was something important. As I picked up the phone, I saw a name. I didn't recognize a man's name. She had his name labeled fellow teacher. The texts were too friendly, too personal. Something was definitely off. My heart started beating harder as I read those messages. She was sharing more with this guy than she was sharing with me, her husband of 10 years. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I wasn't ready to jump to the conclusion, but I couldn't ignore the signs either. That night I confronted her, casually, of course. I didn't want to start off accusing her of anything. I asked about her day, her work, and then about this teacher. She shrugged it off and said he was just a colleague, but I knew her too well. I could tell there was something she wasn't telling me. She looked a little too flustered, a little too quick to move on to the next topic. So here I was stuck in this situation. I never imagined I'd be in, a loving husband and a caring father, now playing the part of a man doubting his wife. What a messed up turn of events. But I decided I wasn't going to bury my head in the sand. I wasn't going to play the fool. If something was going on, I was going to find out. I needed to confirm if my suspicions were right, or if I was just imagining things. But how was I supposed to do that? Follow her around town? Hire a private detective? No, that wasn't me. I decided I'd keep my eyes open and look for more signs. Until then, life had to go on. But I tell you, it's no fun playing the waiting game. The following days were rough. We were living under the same roof, sharing the same bed, but I felt miles apart from her. My mind was filled with doubts and fears. I missed my wife, the woman I married, the mother of my children, and I was terrified I was losing her to another man. I had to find out the truth and fast. So, I decided to be proactive and take matters into my own hands. No more sitting idle and letting my imagination run wild. I had a plan, a simple one, really, randomly dropping by at her school during the day, maybe catch her off guard. After all, the truth has a funny way of showing itself when least expected. Now, this wasn't easy. I'm a mechanic, remember? Running a small garage means you're pretty much tied down to your shop. But I managed. I shuffled my schedule around and handed off some work to my assistant. A bit of a sacrifice. It was my marriage we're talking about here. Well, the first and only time it felt odd. A mechanic at a school? Well, my plan didn't really work, as this particular school had security guards and they wanted to know where you were going. I couldn't move around freely. I knew where her office was, but I highly doubt that this teacher would be around her in her office with all those eyes around. But the real punch came a few weeks later. I had wrapped up early that day and decided to grab a coffee at our local cafe. As I walked in, I saw them seated at a corner table after school hours, far from the school grounds. But above all, a burning need to confront them then and there. I wanted to storm over and demand answers, but I didn't. Not because I was scared, but because I needed a solid plan. The mechanic in me knew well, a hasty repair never holds. I left the cafe, my coffee untouched, my heart heavy. As I walked back to my shop, my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it serious? But one thing was crystal clear. I needed to confront my wife. I really needed to find out what the hell was up. Enough was enough. I couldn't continue playing this solo detective game. The sight of her and the teacher at the cafe had rattled me for sure. So I did what any sane person in my position would do. I hired a private investigator. The PI was a quiet guy, an ex-cop turned private eye. I told him my story and my suspicions and showed him the text. Then he told me to try to stay calm and act like nothing is going on. Then he asked, "Do you think you can do that?" I told him I could because I knew what was at stake. Damn, it didn't take long. A week later, he confirmed my fears. My wife, the woman I had promised to protect and cherish, was seeing that male teacher outside school hours. She was having sex with this man in his car, in the school parking lot. When it was dark, the private investigator said they probably avoided using credit cards and debit cards because they would leave a paper trail. But now I had a choice to make. Should I confront her, or should I prepare first? The mechanic in me chose a latter. Before you fix a problem, you need all your tools in order. And that's what I did. I started getting my ducks in a row. First, I secured my finances with 2 kids to think about. I couldn't afford to let things get messy. Next, I gathered all the evidence I could. The private investigator's report, the text messages I uncovered on my own, even the timestamps of her late-night calls. Meanwhile, I kept my emotions in check. There were moments, sure, when I wanted to explode and confront her with everything I knew, but I kept my cool. I didn't want to give her a chance to spend this in her favor. So, there I was, a mechanic turned detective, turned strategist, juggling my garage, my crumbling marriage, and a secret investigation. It was hard, damn hard, but I had a goal in sight: unmask the truth and protect my family. And nothing was going to deter me from that. Navigating through this murky phase, my next step was a lawyer's office. I told him about my wife's affair, the private investigator's findings, the suspicious texts, and the sudden changes in her behavior. I also mentioned the kids and how I needed to protect them through this ordeal. Eventually, he shared the bitter truth. In our state, adultery didn't matter. It could have substantial implications during divorce proceedings, particularly regarding custody and division of assets. The lawyer advised me to gather more concrete evidence. He suggested continuing my collaboration with the private investigator and recording her secret meetings with her fellow teacher. It seemed a bit extreme, but I took his advice and told him I will continue the investigation with the private investigator. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with the private investigator. We became an unexpected team, both driven by a common purpose to expose the truth. It wasn't an easy job, but I was determined. Every secret rendezvous they had, everything she did when she left our home, armed with the damning evidence, the day of confrontation finally came. It was a cool evening when I decided to address the elephant in the room. Our kids were at a sleepover and we were alone in the house. I didn't waste any time. We sat down on the couch and I threw the file on the coffee table in front of her and said, "That's for you. Can you explain that?" She didn't have anything to say. She was shocked. She had no idea that I was secretly investigating her. She started crying, begging for forgiveness right away. Her pleas as hollow as the promises she had broken. I looked at her, the woman I had loved and trusted, now a stranger, wearing a familiar face. "It's over." I told her there was no room for negotiation, no room for second chances. She shattered my trust, and there was no way to piece it back together. That night she packed her bags and left. Don't know where she went. I didn't ask. And I really didn't care. With the irrefutable evidence at hand, I filed for divorce. When the time came and the moment I handed her the papers, you should have seen the look on her face. She must have thought that I'd be too weak, too attached, too scared to end it all. But she was wrong. The divorce proceedings were tough, a battleground of sorts. She played the victim card, trying to sway the judge in the courtroom against me. She claimed that I was neglectful, that I drove her into the arms of another man. Her words were empty accusations, but they stung. They painted a picture of me that was far from reality. They were calculated, meant to hurt, meant to paint her as the wounded party. Through it all, my attorney was my shield, my advocate. He deflected her accusations, putting forth the evidence we had gathered against her. The pictures, the videos, the messages, the testimonies, all stood testament to her deceit. The divorce was granted in my favor and alimony was averted, but we had to split the proceeds of the house when it sold. This was hard on the kids. And later we ended up with 50-50 custody. She was not a bad parent. Let me make that clear. Karma has a funny way of sneaking up on people. In my ex-wife's case, it came in the form of her losing her job. The school board, upon learning of her affair with another teacher, had no choice but to let her go. It was a question of integrity, of moral conduct. And unfortunately for her, she fell short. The teacher she had been seeing was not spared either. His own marriage crumbled under the weight of his betrayal. Unlike me, his wife wasn't as lenient. She showed no mercy, and he was out of the house before he could even utter an apology. My ex-wife found herself on the rough side of the road, unemployed and disgraced. The job market wasn't kind to her. Nobody wanted to hire a former principal who had been fired for having an affair with a fellow teacher. The repercussions of her actions were far-reaching, and she paid the price. While she battled with her new reality, I was growing. My garage business was booming. It seemed as if the town's folk wanted to show their support, choosing my garage over others. I was humbled and grateful. My world was expanding while hers was shrinking. Amidst all this, I made sure our kids were protected. I explained the situation as gently as I could, reminding them that despite everything, their mother loved them. It was a difficult conversation. They needed to understand that sometimes even adults make mistakes. Life indeed was tough, but it has a way of balancing things out. I never thought I'd find myself in such a situation, but here I was living it. From the divorce to the custody battle, to witnessing my ex-wife's downfall, it has been a tumultuous series of events. About 3 months after the divorce, my ex-wife's affair partner was shot by his soon-to-be ex-wife. He lived, but we learned that he wanted to reconcile with his wife, but she wasn't having it. A fight broke out, and she got a hold of her firearm and shot him. The only interaction I have with my ex-wife is to discuss the kids, and that's it. Right now, I am attending therapy. It seems I might have a little bit of PTSD. If you found this story gripping, please like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.